What does a burning building have to do with our status as persons? Hello and welcome to another episode of Dive Deep a la carte with Lance Phelps. Today I'm going to be discussing the issue of abortion. I'm going to be specifically dealing with one popular argument that pro-abortion advocates use to try to demonstrate that we understand intuitively that babies, embryos, are not humans. Well, at least they don't say they're not humans. They say that they're not persons, that we actually value them less. So the example, of course, is the burning building example. The argument goes that say that you have a building that is burning down, and on one side of the building, in a locked room, you have 1,000 viable embryos. They only need to be implanted in a woman in order to make her pregnant, and that will lead to a human life. And then across the building, you have 100 infants that are already born. And you can only save one. You can't save both of these. Which one will you choose? Well, I think that it's obvious that in this cultural context, the majority of us would choose the children. And now there are multiple reasons for this, but the argument goes, well, if you'll choose the children, the 100 children, you're obviously valuing those 100 children greater than the 1,000, 10 times as much, embryos that are also, fertilized eggs ready to be made into human beings, which, the argument goes, means that we know that babies are not worth as much as actual humans, not actual humans, but actual human beings that are born. We know that they're worth, that the human being that is born is worth more. But does this actually comment on the nature of personhood or status of personhood within the art debate? And I would answer that it does not at all. And the problems are manifold. One of the main problems that you face is that this argument effectively assumes that our intuitive understanding, or really it's not intuitive understanding, but our emotional understanding at the time of our cultural context, it somehow establishes some universal principle. Because remember, this is an argument on the personhood status of these beings, of these fertilized embryos. It's stated that they are not as valuable, therefore they are not persons. But this argument is, if it proves what it intends to prove, actually proves too much. Let's shift it up a little bit, and let's say that you have 100 infants that are in a burning room on one side, and you have 1,000 elderly people that need care in order to survive on the other side. Will our decision to go after the 100 infants mean that the elderly people are worth less than the infants? And the answer, of course, is no. And it also does not speak to their personhood status at all. There are other cultural factors that weigh in on that decision, not this personhood status of that particular group of people. And then if we take this to a more extreme example, let's say that we were to put this exact same example in front of a Nazi sympathizer back in the World War II or World War II era. You will find that if you were to put 100 Jews versus 10 Germans, the decision on their part would be 10 Germans all day long, and some of them would revel in the fact that the Jews would die. Does this mean that the Jews are not persons today? Of course, we know this is ridiculous because that particular cultural moment does not dictate the personhood status of a people based on the emotional response that we saw in that cultural moment. So cultural moments can't determine what is a person and what is not a person. Instead, to determine whether or not something is a person or something has rights, we have to consult with a more foundational, more universal principle. We have to consult with the only truth that there is. We have to consult with Jesus Christ, the way, the truth, and the life. Now, of course, from an atheistic standpoint, this doesn't make any sense, but this is another example where we have to show that the atheistic standpoint has no actual foundation for its belief. It is the shifting sands of whatever seems right at the time. And the only real rock-solid foundation is, of course, Jesus Christ. He himself says this. He says that anyone who builds his house on the rock, or anyone who believes in him and trusts in him, is like those who build a house on the rock. Whereas if you do not believe or trust in Jesus Christ, you're building your house on shifting sands. But nevertheless, this argument does not actually prove what it purports to prove, because it's trying to say from one cultural moment what is universally true, but it can't possibly do so because the example itself is only playing on an emotional response. On an emotional response that, if you put it in certain cultural context, let's say that there's a culture that has thousands of women who need to be impregnated, where there's a major lacking of children. The 100 children wouldn't cut it. They would easily take the 1,000 embryos. But that, again, in that cultural moment, if something like that were to happen, that cultural moment would not then say that the already born children are somehow less human than the ones who are yet to be born. So we see that this argument doesn't really hold water. At first, it may seem a little bit insurmountable, but it really is based on just an emotional tug or an emotional pull, and then it tries to draw conclusions that it goes way beyond doing so. Where do we get the idea of personhood, or who is a person, or how do we determine who has rights? Well, if we go by any other framework than Jesus Christ and his orthodox belief, where we find in the Bible, then we're going to have basically a shifting sand understanding of what is truth or what is actual personhood status.